Somewhere right now, someone is being told to specialize. Pick one skill, master one lane, stay in it for the rest of your life. And somewhere else, a small handful of people ignored that advice completely and became impossible to replace. There was a man in Renaissance Italy who was a philosopher, a diplomat, a military strategist, a historian, and a playwright, all at once. While everyone around him was busy being average at one thing, he was busy becoming dangerous at 5. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and what he understood nearly 500 years ago is something almost nobody around you understands today. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why the specialists of the world are replaceable, and the polymaths are not. Stay until the end because the 7th secret is the one that separates people who talk about reinventing themselves from people who actually do it. Let's begin. Part 1. The Trap of the Specialist. We live in a world that worships specialization. Pick a lane, they say. Go deep, not wide. Become the best at one thing and the world will reward you. For a while that advice worked, but something has changed, and most people haven't noticed yet. The specialist is now the most replaceable person in any room. A person who does one thing, no matter how well, can be replaced by someone cheaper who does that same one thing. Or worse, replaced by a machine that does it faster without ever needing sleep, credit, or a paycheck. Machiavelli understood something the modern world forgot. Real power was never in doing one thing perfectly. Real power was in connecting things that nobody else could connect. A ruler who understood politics, but not psychology, would be manipulated by his own advisors. A general who understood war but not economics would win battles and lose kingdoms. It was the men who moved fluidly between fields, who could speak the language of a soldier, a merchant, a priest, and a poet, who never lost their grip on power. This is the first truth you need to accept. In a world full of narrow experts, the person who can move between worlds becomes impossible to box in, impossible to replace, and impossible to predict. But here's the uncomfortable part. Becoming that person requires something almost nobody is willing to do. Part 2. Why average thinkers stay average. Here's a question most people never ask themselves. Why does the average person stay average for their entire life? It's not because they lack intelligence. It's not because they lack opportunity. It's because of a single, invisible habit, the habit of consuming instead of building. Watch how most people spend their evenings. They scroll, they watch, they consume other people's ideas, other people's opinions, other people's lives, and at the end of the night, they have nothing to show for the hours that just disappeared. Machiavelli spent his exile years, after being tortured and removed from political life, doing something almost nobody in his position would have done. He didn't spiral into bitterness. He didn't waste his days in self-pity. He sat down every single evening, put on his formal robes as if entering a royal court, and studied. He read history, he wrote, he built something out of the very years that should have destroyed him. That period of exile, the lowest point of his life, is when he wrote The Prince, the book that would make him immortal centuries after his death. This is the second truth. The polymath is not built during comfortable years. The polymath is built during the years everyone else wastes. If you are in a season of boredom, failure, or forced isolation right now, that is not a curse. That is raw material. Most people waste their hardest seasons. The rare few build empires out of them. Part 3. The skill nobody talks about. Cross-pollination. Here is something almost no one teaches you in school. The most valuable ideas in history didn't come from people who knew one subject deeply. They came from people who knew 2 or 3 subjects well enough to connect them in ways specialists never could. This is called cross-pollination. Taking a principle from one field and applying it somewhere nobody expects. Machiavelli took lessons from ancient Roman history and applied them directly to the political chaos of Renaissance Italy. He borrowed from military strategy to explain political survival. He borrowed from human psychology to explain why entire empires collapsed from the inside. Nobody who only studied politics could have written what he wrote. It took someone who moved between history, psychology, military theory, and human nature to see the patterns that specialists were blind to. Here's how you apply this in your own life. Whatever field you're in right now, ask yourself, what does psychology say about this? What does history say about this? What would an economist notice here that I'm missing? What would an economist notice here that I'm missing? What would an artist see that an engineer wouldn't? The moment you start asking those questions, you stop thinking like a specialist and start thinking like someone dangerous, someone who sees the whole board while everyone else is staring at one square. Part 4. The myth of too late. There is a lie that keeps more people average than almost anything else. The belief that it's too late to start something new. Too old to learn a new skill. Too far behind to change careers. Too invested in one path to explore another. Machiavelli didn't publish The Prince as a young rising star. He wrote his most influential work in his 40s, after his political career had already collapsed. After he'd already lost everything he'd spent his life building. By every conventional measure, he was finished. He wasn't finished. He was just getting started in a different direction. The polymath mindset requires you to kill the idea that your identity is fixed. You are not just an accountant or just a teacher or just whatever job title is currently printed on your business card. That title is one chapter. It is not the whole book. The moment you accept a single label as your entire identity, you stop growing in every direction that label doesn't cover. And that is exactly how average thinkers are made. Not through lack of ability, but through the quiet acceptance of a smaller life than the one they were capable of. Part 5. The discipline. Nobody wants to hear about here is the part of this video most people will not want to hear. Becoming a polymath is not about talent. It is not about being naturally gifted in multiple areas. It is about a discipline so unglamorous that most people quit before they ever get good at it. Machiavelli's own words describe his exile evenings in vivid detail, how he would leave behind the mud and frustration of his day, put on formal clothing, and enter what he called the ancient courts of great men through their writings, asking them questions, absorbing their answers, for hours, night after night, with no audience, no recognition, and no guarantee it would ever matter. That is the discipline nobody glamorizes. Nobody makes content about the version of success that looks like sitting alone, night after night, learning something that won't pay off for years, maybe not in your lifetime. But that is exactly the price of becoming someone rare. The specialist puts in 8 hours and goes home. The polymath puts in 8 hours and then spends the evening building the second, third, and fourth skill that will eventually make the first one irreplaceable. This isn't about burning yourself out. It's about protecting a small, consistent portion of your time, even 30 minutes a day, for building something beyond what your job requires of you. 30 minutes a day, protected fiercely, compounds into something almost nobody around you will have in 5 years. Part 6. How to choose what to learn. Next, a common mistake people make when they hear "become a polymath" is trying to learn everything at once and burning out within a month. Machiavelli didn't study everything. He studied deliberately, in a way that served a clear purpose, understanding power, human behavior, and how civilizations rise and fall. Every subject he studied fed into that central obsession. This is the key most people miss. A polymath is not someone who knows a little about everything randomly. A polymath is someone who chooses 2 or 3 fields that reinforce each other and goes deep enough in each one that the combination becomes rare. Ask yourself what your central obsession is. What problem do you care about solving more than anything else? Once you know that, choose your second and third skills based on what will serve that obsession. Not based on what's trending, not based on what looks impressive on paper. A doctor who also understands psychology becomes a better healer. A business person who also understands design becomes a better builder. A writer who also understands data becomes a more persuasive communicator. The combination is what makes you rare, not the individual pieces. Part 7. The real reason people fear becoming a polymath. Here is the secret nobody tells you. Most people don't stay specialists because they lack the ability to learn more. They stay specialists because becoming a polymath requires something most people are terrified of, being a beginner again. It is uncomfortable to be excellent at one thing and then deliberately choose to be bad at something new. It bruises the ego. It feels like a step backward, especially after years of being respected for what you already know. Machiavelli, a man who had once negotiated with kings and commanded diplomatic missions across Europe, had to sit alone in exile and rebuild his identity from nothing. That kind of humility, going from respected expert to humble student again, is what almost nobody is willing to do voluntarily. But here's the truth. Those who avoid this discomfort never discover. Every single skill you now do without thinking, you were once terrible at. The polymath simply chooses to feel that discomfort again and again on purpose, because they understand that the temporary sting of being a beginner is the price of becoming someone rare. The final truth: the average thinker stays in one lane, because it's comfortable, because it's safe, because the world tells them that specialization is the only path to mastery. But comfort and safety were never the price of becoming rare. Discomfort was. Discipline was. The willingness to be a beginner again in a season of your life when everyone expected you to already have it all figured out. That was always the real price. Machiavelli didn't become one of history's most studied minds because he was the smartest man in Florence. He became immortal because when his world collapsed, he chose to build instead of break. He chose to combine instead of specialize. He chose to keep learning long after the world had stopped expecting anything from him. You don't need permission to do the same. You don't need a title, a degree, or anyone's approval to start connecting the dots between the things you already know and the things you're curious about. The rare mind isn't born. It's built, quietly, deliberately, one uncomfortable evening at a time, while everyone else is scrolling through someone else's life instead of building their own. That is how you become a modern polymath in a world of average thinkers. If this changed the way you think, let me know in the comments which part hit hardest. And if you're ready to stop being average, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly one purpose: to help you become someone rare.